The lot smelled of baked asphalt and old rust, the kind of rust that has had decades to settle into something almost geological. And Victoria Hale, CEO of Hale Automotive Group, stood at its edge in a cream linen suit and let the silence do the work before she spoke. "That," she said, gesturing at the collapsed Shelby with two fingers, the way a person gestures at something they would prefer not to touch, "is a rust bucket someone's grandfather should have crushed in 1987. The crowd laughed. Lily Webb, 7 years old, pressed her small, copper-colored toy horse tighter against her sternum and said nothing. Her father said nothing either. He did not know that Marcus Webb, standing at the back of the crowd in a gray work shirt with grease still under his left thumbnail, had spent 11 years on Carroll Shelby's own engineering floor, that his hands had touched this specific car before Victoria Hale had learned to drive, and that the chassis number stamped into the frame rail beneath 40 years of road grime was a number Marcus could recite from memory the way other men recite their children's birthdays. He did not know any of that. Almost no one did. What happened next would take weeks, and it would be quiet, and it would be the kind of thing that cannot be undone once it is seen. The morning Marcus Webb first walked into the Shelby Engineering Division in San Jose, the air inside the shop had smelled of machined aluminum and coffee burned down to the bottom of a pot. And he had been 24 years old and certain of almost nothing except the work. He had grown up in Fresno in a house where his father rebuilt carburetors on the kitchen table. And he had taken that education, informal, oil-stained, deeply serious, and turned it into a degree in mechanical engineering from Cal Poly, and then a letter of hire that he had read 3 times before he believed it. Carroll Shelby's operation was not large. That was the point. Every person in that building carried a specific weight of knowledge, and the knowledge was not interchangeable. Marcus's weight was powertrains and frame geometry. He was the kind of engineer who could hear a misalignment before he measured it, who kept a notebook of hand-drawn tolerances that his supervisor once described as the most useful document in the shop. He was not loud about any of this. He simply worked. He met Claire in 1998 at a parts supplier's trade dinner he had almost skipped. She was a structural materials consultant, and she had been arguing quietly, but with great precision, with a man twice her age, about aluminum fatigue thresholds. And Marcus had stood nearby and listened and thought that he had never heard anyone explain stress propagation with that particular combination of accuracy and calm. They married in 2001. Lily arrived in 2007, small and loud and certain, with Claire's eyes and Marcus's habit of going very still when something interested her. Claire died in the spring of 2012, a Tuesday, a brain aneurysm, the kind of thing that arrives without a sound and leaves everything rearranged. Marcus had been at the shop when it happened. He had driven to the hospital and sat in a chair beside her bed for 6 hours, and then driven home and made Lily dinner and put her to bed, and sat at the kitchen table until the light changed. He left the Shelby division 4 months later, not because the work had stopped meaning something, but because Lily was 5, and she had already lost one parent to a building that kept him away from her, and he was not willing to let her lose another to absence. He found a rented garage on the east side of Tucson, a 3-bay space that smelled of old motor oil and dry desert heat. And he put a sign above the door that said, "Webb Mechanical," and he charged fair prices, and he did not advertise his history. The people who brought him their cars knew him as the quiet mechanic with a daughter who sometimes sat on a stool in the corner doing homework. They did not know about the notebooks. They did not know about the 11 years. That was how Marcus wanted it. Lily named everything. She had named her copper-colored toy horse Copper, which she carried in the front pocket of her overalls, and she named the shop's ancient floor Jack Gerald. And when Marcus brought the wrecked Shelby home on a flatbed trailer on a gray October morning, the car folded and rust-bloomed and missing its rear quarter panel entirely, Lily walked around it twice and announced that its name was Red, on account of the color the metal would be once it was clean. "It's not red yet," Marcus said. "It will be," she said, and went back inside. Marcus had found the car through a salvage listing, a single paragraph and 3 photographs, the listing price low enough that he had read it twice to confirm it was not a typo. The seller was a property management company clearing an estate. The car had been stored in a covered lot in Phoenix for 31 years, and before that it had been driven hard. And before that, Marcus believed, though he had not yet confirmed it, it had been something else entirely. He called Ramon Diaz the same evening. Ramon had worked with Marcus for 3 years, a former apprentice from a dealership in Albuquerque who had followed the work west and never quite left. Ramon was 29, methodical, and possessed of the specific patience that long restoration requires. The kind of patience that does not mind spending an afternoon on a single bolt. He arrived the next morning in his truck with a thermos of coffee and looked at the Shelby for a long time without speaking. "How bad?" he said finally. "Frame's intact," Marcus said. "Everything else is a conversation." Ramon nodded. That was enough. Victoria Hale had purchased the adjacent property, the lot where the Shelby had originally been stored, and the warehouse behind it, 6 weeks earlier as part of a portfolio acquisition that her company described in the press release as a strategic expansion of Hale Automotive Group's southwestern footprint. The press event she staged in the lot was ostensibly about announcing a new service center. In practice, it was about Victoria Hale standing in front of cameras and looking decisive. She had not known the Shelby was still there when she bought the property. Her acquisitions team had flagged it as a liability, an unregistered vehicle on commercial land, a potential environmental concern, a thing to be removed. When she arrived at the lot and saw the collapsed car still sitting in the corner, she had done what she did. With most things that complicated her narrative, she had made it part of the story. "That," she said to the assembled press and the small crowd of local business owners and the handful of curious passers-by, "is exactly the kind of derelict liability we're cleaning up." She smiled. It was a practiced smile, the kind that reads as warmth from 20 feet away. Someone's grandfather should have crushed it in 1987. The crowd laughed. A photographer from the Tucson Courier got the shot. Marcus, standing at the edge of the crowd with Lily beside him, had come because he had seen the event notice and understood that the lot was adjacent to the storage address listed in the salvage paperwork. He had wanted to confirm the provenance. He had not expected to be standing there when the CEO of a regional automotive conglomerate made a joke about the car he had spent the last 3 weeks disassembling. He did not respond. He looked at the car. He looked at the chassis rail, visible through the collapsed bodywork, and he thought about the number stamped into it, and he said nothing. Lily pressed copper against her chest. COO Daniel Garrett stood slightly behind Victoria Hale during the press event, holding a tablet and watching the crowd with the careful attention of a man who has learned to manage consequences before they arrive. He had known about the Shelby's potential significance for 10 days. He had not told Victoria. He had instead made 3 phone calls to a private collector in Scottsdale and had begun the process of arranging a quiet acquisition, a deal that would route the car through a holding company and arrive in the collector's garage without Victoria's name attached to it. He had not anticipated Marcus Webb. Day 1 in the rented garage, Marcus and Ramon began with the frame. Not the body, not the engine, the frame, because the frame would tell them everything. Marcus worked with a wire brush and a light, moving along the left rail in the particular silence that meant he was reading rather than cleaning. Ramon worked the right side and did not ask Geisis questions. The work was careful, unhurried, the kind of work that cannot be rushed without losing the thing you are trying to find. Lily sat on her stool in the corner, copper in her pocket, and drew the car in her notebook. Not as it was, but as she imagined it would be. The chassis rail smelled of old road and something underneath that. A mineral dryness, the smell of metal that had been sealed from air for a long time. and Marcus ran his thumb along the inner surface of the left rail on the morning of day 4, and felt before he saw the raised edges of a stamp. He did not move for a moment. He had learned, over many years, to be still when something important was about to become clear. He brought the light closer. The stamp was there. 6 digits, a letter prefix, pressed into the steel with the particular depth and spacing of a factory tool rather than an aftermarket punch. He had seen stamps like this before. He had been in the room where some of them were made. He read the number aloud, quietly, to no one in particular. Ramon looked up from the right rail. "That what I think it is?" "Write it down," Marcus said. Victoria Hale staged the press event on a Thursday, 12 days into Marcus's work on the car. The event was framed as a safety announcement. The lot would be cleared, the derelict vehicle removed, the land prepared for construction. Her communications team had drafted a statement describing the Shelby as an unregistered, structurally compromised vehicle presenting an ongoing liability to the surrounding properties. The statement was accurate in its narrow way. It was also time to precede any formal authentication by approximately 3 weeks. The crowd was larger than the first event. Local press, a television crew from the Tucson affiliate, several members of the city planning board. Victoria Hale stood at the podium in a charcoal blazer and spoke about responsibility and community investment and the importance of maintaining safe commercial environments. She was very good at this. The words were not false, exactly. They were arranged. "This vehicle," she said, gesturing at the Shelby, which had been moved to the center of the lot for the occasion, "has been sitting on this property for over 3 decades. It is structurally unsound, it is unregistered, and it represents exactly the kind of derelict liability that responsible development cannot accommodate." She paused. "The demolition order has been signed." The crowd applauded. A city council member nodded in the front row. Marcus was there again. He had come because Ramon had called him that morning to say the event was happening, and because Marcus had understood immediately what the timing meant. He stood near the back, Lily beside him in her overalls with copper in her pocket. And he listened to the statement about the demolition order, and he felt something settle in his chest. Not anger exactly, but a kind of clarity. He did not know that Daniel Garrett, standing again slightly behind Victoria at the podium, had accelerated the demolition timeline by 4 days that morning, after receiving a call from the Scottsdale collector asking whether the acquisition deal was still viable. Garrett had said he would handle it. He had believed that. After the formal remarks, Victoria Hale moved through the crowd with the ease of a person accustomed to rooms, accepting handshakes and directing her communications director with small, precise gestures. She did not notice Marcus until he was standing at the edge of the cleared space around the car, looking at the chassis rail. She noticed him then, because he had gone very still. "Can I help you?" she said in the tone of a person who does not expect the answer to be interesting. Marcus looked at her. He looked at the rail. He said the chassis number aloud, clearly, in the particular way he had of stating facts, without inflection, without performance, as though the number were simply a thing that existed and required acknowledgement. The room did not go quiet immediately. It went quiet in stages, the way a crowd quiets when it senses that something has shifted, but cannot yet identify what. The television crew turned. The city council member stopped nodding. Marcus said, "That number matches the Le Mans race log entry from June 1969. Car number 7. I have the log." He did not say anything else. The demolition order had been signed. That was the fact Victoria Hale returned to in the silence that followed, the way a person returns to a known coordinate when the terrain becomes uncertain. She said, "The order has been signed," and her voice was steady, and she looked at her communications director, and the communications director looked at Garrett. Garrett was looking at his tablet. The Le Mans race log was not a document Marcus had found recently. He had known about it for years, a photocopy given to him by a retired Shelby team manager named Howard Briggs, who had worked the 1969 race and kept meticulous records. and had, in his retirement, made copies of everything and distributed them to the people he trusted to understand what they meant. Marcus had kept his copy in a manila folder in the bottom drawer of his desk at the shop, behind the tax records, in the particular way he kept things he considered important. Quietly, without display. The log listed car number 7 by chassis number. It listed the driver. It listed the qualifying time, the pit rotation, the fuel consumption across 17 laps. It listed a stress fracture discovered in the timing gear cover during a pre-race inspection and the repair made overnight by the engineering team. And the name of the engineer who signed off on the repair. That name was not Marcus Webb. He had not been born yet in 1969. But he knew the handwriting. He had worked beside the man who wrote it for 6 years. The demolition order remained signed through the end of that day. Victoria Hale's legal team placed 3 calls to the city planning office before 5 o'clock. The calls were about process, about timelines, about the proper procedure for contesting a chassis authentication claim against an active demolition order. The planning office said they would need to review. Marcus drove home. Lily fell asleep in the passenger seat with copper tucked under her chin. He carried her inside and put her to bed and sat at the kitchen table for a while in the quiet. The chassis number was confirmed. That was enough for now. The timing gear cover came off on the morning of day 9, and it smelled of old oil and something beneath that. A faint metallic sweetness. The smell of aluminum that has been very hot and then sealed for a very long time. And Marcus set it on the workbench under the overhead light and looked at it for a long time before he touched it again. There was a mark on the inner face of the cover, in the lower left quadrant, pressed into the casting with a small hand stamp. It was not a factory mark, it was not a serial number or a part code. It was a personal mark, 2 initials and a small geometric shape, a triangle with a horizontal line through its base. The kind of mark a craftsman leaves not for documentation, but for himself. The way a stonemason will sometimes press his thumb into mortar in a place no one will ever see. Marcus had made that mark. He had been 26 years old, and it had been the night before the 1969 Le Mans qualifying run, and he stopped himself. He had not been born in 1969, but he had been trained by the man who had, and that man had shown him the mark once, on a different cover, in the back of the Shelby shop on a Tuesday afternoon, and had said only that a man should know his own work when he sees it again. The mark on this cover matched the description in the shop notes Marcus had kept from that conversation. Exactly. He called Ramon over. Ramon looked at the mark for a moment and then looked at Marcus. "That's the one from the log," Ramon said. "Yes," Marcus said. Victoria Hale had been briefed on the chassis number claim by her legal team on the morning after the press event, and she had responded in the way she responded to most complications, by accelerating the adjacent process. If the demolition order was under review, then the review should be resolved quickly, and if the car could not be demolished immediately, then its status as an unregistered vehicle on commercial property should be formalized through the city's impound process, which would achieve the same result through a different mechanism. She said this to Garrett in a brief meeting that lasted 11 minutes. Garrett took notes. He did not mention the Scottsdale collector. He did not mention the 3 calls. What he did not know was that the planning office had already forwarded Marcus's chassis documentation to the city's Historic Vehicle Review Board, which had a statutory obligation to investigate any claim of documented racing provenance before authorizing demolition. The review board had 7 days to respond. The clock had started the previous afternoon. Marcus did not know about the impound process. He knew about the timing gear cover. Day 11. Ramon arrived at 7 in the morning with coffee and a new set of wire brushes, and they worked the engine bay in sections, Marcus on the left side and Ramon on the right, moving with the particular rhythm that develops between 2 people who have worked together long enough to stop narrating the work. Lily came after school and sat on her stool and watched them for a while, and then said without looking up from her notebook, "You fixed it before?" Marcus looked at her. "What?" "The car," she said. "You fixed it before, when it was broken the first time." She looked up then with Claire's eyes, direct and without self-consciousness. "That's why you know where everything goes." He did not answer immediately. He turned back to the engine bay and picked up the wire brush and ran it along the valve cover in the long, slow strokes that the work required. "Something like that," he said. Ramon, on the other side of the engine, said nothing, but he was smiling. Day 12, day 13. The timing gear cover sat on the workbench, cleaned now. The mark visible under the light with a clarity that had not been possible when it was coated in 50 years of oil residue. Marcus photographed it with a macro lens, the kind of photograph that captures depth and edge, and the particular quality of a hand-pressed stamp versus a machine-pressed one. He sent the photographs to 3 people: the Historic Vehicle Review Board, a retired Shelby team archivist named Patricia Cho, who had been documenting the 1969 race cars for 15 years, and a metallurgist at the University of Arizona named Dr. James Okafor, who specialized in period aluminum casting analysis. He did not call any of them to follow up. He sent the photographs and returned to the work. Day 14. The engine turned over for the first time. It was not a clean sound. It was rough and uncertain, the sound of something remembering rather than performing. But it turned, and Ramon stood back and looked at Marcus. And Marcus stood with his hand on the fender and listened to the engine find its rhythm. Lily, on her stool, said red. Just that. One word. The car's name confirmed. Dr. Okafor's report arrived on the morning of day 16, a PDF attached to an email with a subject line that read simply, "Timing Gear Cover Analysis, Webb Mechanical." The report was 11 pages. Marcus read it at the kitchen table before Lily woke up, with coffee going cold beside him. The metallurgical analysis confirmed that the aluminum alloy composition of the timing gear cover was consistent with the specific casting batch used in Shelby's race preparation shop in 1968 and 1969, a batch that had a distinct trace element profile, a slightly elevated manganese content, that differed measurably from both earlier and later production runs. The hand stamp, Okafor wrote, showed tool pressure characteristics consistent with manual application using a stamp of the type common to small batch fabrication shops of that era. The mark itself, he noted, matched a description in Patricia Cho's archival records of a personal identifier used by a senior engineer on the 1969 race preparation team. The report was not a story. It was a measurement. That was what made it irrefutable. Victoria Hale received a copy of the Okafor report from the Historic Vehicle Review Board on the same morning, forwarded with a formal notice that the demolition order was suspended pending full authentication review. She read the executive summary. She set the document on her desk and looked at it for a moment, and then she called Garrett. The call lasted 4 minutes. Garrett's voice, when he answered, had the particular quality of a man who has been waiting for a call he hoped would not come. Victoria's voice, when she hung up, had changed. Not in volume, not in speed, but in register. The practiced warmth had receded, and what was underneath was something quieter and more careful. The voice of a person recalculating. She did not call Marcus. Not yet. But she had his number now, and she was looking at it. The rear seat came out on the morning of day 17, and the smell that rose from beneath it was the smell of old paper and heat, and something faintly chemical. The particular smell of drafting linen that has been folded and sealed in a warm space for decades. And Marcus went still the moment it reached him. He had not expected this. He reached into the cavity beneath the seat pan with both hands and drew out a folded document, careful and slow, the way he handled anything whose age he could not yet measure. He set it on the workbench and unfolded it in sections, each fold releasing a new layer of that chemical smell, until it was open and flat under the light. It was a blueprint, hand-drafted in pencil and ink on drafting linen that had yellowed to the color of old cream. The lines were precise and dense, aerodynamic geometry, airflow vectors, the specific hood vent configuration that Marcus had always considered the most distinctive feature of the 1967 race preparation body. Dimensions in the margin, in a handwriting he recognized. Notes in the corner about downforce coefficients at speed, written in the shorthand that the Shelby engineering team had used internally, a shorthand that had never been published or standardized, that existed only in the memories of the people who had worked in that building. He stood at the workbench for a long time. Ramon came over and looked at the blueprint and then looked at Marcus. "That's original?" Ramon said. It was not a question. "Yes," Marcus said. Victoria Hale had, by day 17, shifted her strategy. The demolition order was suspended. The impound process had stalled against the review board's statutory hold, and Garrett's private acquisition arrangement had begun to unravel. The Scottsdale collector had withdrawn when the review board notice became public record. Victoria's legal team was now focused on establishing that the car, regardless of its provenance, remained on property owned by Hale Automotive Group, and that ownership of the land conferred certain rights over objects stored upon it. She had not yet been told about the blueprint. Marcus photographed the document in sections, the macro lens again, then in full, then with a scale reference. He sent the photographs to Patricia Cho and to Dr. Reginald Osei, an automotive historian at the Peterson Automotive Museum in Los Angeles, who had published 2 peer-reviewed papers on Shelby's 1967 through 1969 race preparation program. He included a brief note explaining what the document was and where it had been found. Osei replied within 6 hours. His reply was 3 sentences long. "I need to see the original. This matches a set of drawings described in Howard Briggs's 1971 deposition to the Shelby estate but never located. Please, do not move it." Marcus did not move it. Day 18. Day 19. Lily came to the shop after school both days and sat on her stool and watched Marcus and Ramon work. And on the evening of day 19, she said while Marcus was cleaning the blueprint surface with a conservator's brush he had ordered overnight, "Is that a map?" "A kind of map," Marcus said. "Of what?" "Of how the air moves over the car," he said, "so it goes faster." Lily considered this. "Claire knew about air," she said. She called her mother by her first name sometimes, the way children do when they are trying to hold something at a useful distance. "She told me air has weight." "She was right," Marcus said. He kept his eyes on the blueprint. His hand was steady. Day 21. Doctor. Osei arrived at the shop in Tucson on a Tuesday morning, having driven from the airport in a rental car, carrying a leather document case and a portable ultraviolet lamp. He was a compact man in his 50s, with reading glasses on a cord around his neck, and the particular manner of a person who has spent a long career being careful about what he says in public. He examined the blueprint for 2 hours, using the UV lamp to check the paper composition and the ink layering, cross-referencing the dimensions against photographs in his document case, making notes in a small spiral notebook. When he was done, he sat back on the stool Marcus had offered him and removed his reading glasses and cleaned them with the hem of his shirt. "This is the only surviving example of the 1967 aerodynamic modification drawings," he said. "The hood vent geometry on this car is unique. There is no other Shelby from this period with this specific configuration. These drawings are the proof of why." He looked at Marcus. "How long have you known?" "I suspected," Marcus said. "I didn't know until you said so." Osei nodded slowly. He understood the distinction. The authentication report that Osei filed with the Historic Vehicle Review Board was 12 pages, with 14 supporting references and 4 annotated photographs. It concluded that the blueprint was an original working document from Shelby's 1967 race preparation program, that the hood vent geometry it described was unique to this specific vehicle, and that the document's presence beneath the rear seat was consistent with the practice of storing working drawings inside race cars during transport, a practice documented in Howard Briggs's 1971 deposition. The report was filed on a Thursday. By Friday morning, it was part of the public record. Victoria Hale read it that afternoon. She read it in her office alone, the door closed. Her assistant heard nothing for 22 minutes. Then Victoria called Garrett into the office, and the conversation that followed lasted 9 minutes. And when Garrett left, his face had the particular quality of a man who has been told, very precisely, the full extent of what he had done. Victoria called Marcus that evening. He was at the kitchen table, Lily asleep upstairs, the blueprint in its archival sleeve on the counter. Her voice when she spoke was not the voice from the press events. It was quieter, more careful. The register had dropped, the practiced warmth replaced by something that sounded, if not quite like contrition, then at least like the absence of performance. "Mr. Webb," she said, "I owe you an apology for the public remarks. That was uninformed and it was dismissive." A pause. "I'd like to discuss whether there's a path forward that serves the car's preservation. Hale Automotive has resources that might be relevant." Marcus looked at the blueprint in its sleeve. He thought about the mark on the timing gear cover. He thought about Lily saying Claire knew about air. "I appreciate that," he said. "Send something in writing and I'll look at it." He thanked her and ended the call. He did not say anything else. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, and it smelled of old paper and the particular dryness of climate-controlled storage. The kind of smell that belongs to rooms where things are kept because they matter. Marcus set it on the workbench without opening it. He had been expecting it for 11 days ever since the archivist at the Automobile Club de l'Ouest had confirmed by telephone that the request was valid and the documents were real, and that she would send certified copies by registered post. He had written the request in careful, formal English. He had attached photographs of the log entry fragment he had found folded inside the race blueprint's linen sleeve. A strip of paper no wider than 2 fingers, printed in the compressed typeface of a field logbook, bearing the chassis number 1075 and a lap notation and a date in June of 1969. He had not told anyone he sent the request. Not Denny, not the appraiser, not the woman from Hale Automotive, whose calls had grown more frequent and whose voice had begun to carry something different in it, something that was not quite urgency but was close. He opened the envelope with a box cutter, slowly, the way he did everything. Inside were 4 pages. The first was a cover letter on ACO letterhead, signed by the Director of Historical Records, a woman named Dr. Isabelle Fournier. The second and third were certified photocopies of the original 1969 Le Mans race log, 2 facing pages, the entries handwritten in French in a cramped and hurried script, and there on the left page, third entry from the top, was the number. Chassis 1075, car number 47, entered by a privateer team out of Dallas, Texas. Completed 112 laps before a fuel system fault retired it in the 18th hour. The fourth page was Dr. Fournier's authentication statement, notarized and stamped, confirming that the log was original, that the entry was unaltered, and that chassis 1075 had been verified against the ACO's own registration records as a factory-built 1967 Shelby GT 500 delivered to the privateer team in March of 1969. Marcus read all 4 pages twice. He set them down. He looked at the car. It had not changed. It was still the same wreck it had always been. The crumpled nose, the stripped interior, the surface rust on the lower quarters, but the number on the hidden rail matched the number on the ACO letterhead, and the number on the timing gear cover matched the number on the ACO letterhead, and the blueprint under the rear seat had been drawn for a car that raced at Le Mans, and the car that raced at Le Mans was sitting in his garage on a Tuesday morning smelling of old metal and patient time. He called Denny. Denny arrived in 20 minutes, still carrying his coffee. He read the 4 pages standing up, and when he finished, he set them down on the workbench the same way Marcus had, carefully, as if they might change if handled roughly. He did not say anything for a long moment. Then he said, 11 days. Marcus nodded. Denny picked up his coffee and drank from it and said, okay. That afternoon, Marcus called the appraiser, a man named Gerald Fitch, who had spent 30 years authenticating competition Shelbys for major auction houses, and who had, 2 weeks earlier, told Marcus that if the chassis number was confirmed and the provenance held, the car would need to be seen by a room. Gerald Fitch listened to the description of Dr. Fournier's letter and was quiet for a moment, and then said he would make some calls. He called back within the hour. There was an auction scheduled in 40 days in Scottsdale. A significant auction, the kind that drew serious collectors and serious press. Gerald said he could get the car in front of the right people before the auction, at a formal presentation, if Marcus was willing. Marcus said he was willing. He told Lily that evening over dinner. She was eating her soup in the careful way she had, the spoon held in both hands, and she listened to him explain that the car was going to be shown to some people who would understand what it was. She thought about this. Then she said, like how Mom understood about air. Marcus looked at her across the table. He said yes, exactly like that. The presentation took place on a Thursday. Gerald Fitch had arranged it at a private facility outside Scottsdale, a clean, well-lit space used by auction houses for pre-sale inspections. The car was transported on an enclosed trailer. Marcus rode with it. Denny drove separately and arrived early and stood near the door with his coffee and his quiet. There were 7 people in the room when the car was uncovered. Gerald Fitch, 2 independent authentication specialists, a representative from the Shelby American Collection, a journalist from a publication that covered significant automotive history, and Diana Hale. She had come with an associate, a man in a gray suit who carried a leather folder and said nothing. She stood near the back of the room when the cover came off the car, and her expression was the careful expression of someone who has been told something they did not want to believe and has come to see whether it is true. Dr. Fournier's certified documents were presented first. Then Gerald Fitch walked the room through each point of physical evidence: the chassis stamp on the hidden rail, the hand-stamped timing gear cover, the aerodynamic blueprint in its linen sleeve, the race log fragment that matched the ACO archive. He spoke in the measured, unhurried way of a man who has spent 30 years in rooms like this and knows that evidence does not require volume. The 2 independent specialists examined the chassis stamp under magnification and conferred quietly and signed their authentication forms. The Shelby American Collection representative made a note in a small book and then looked at the car for a long time without writing anything else. Then Gerald Fitch said, "The car is a documented 1967 Shelby GT500, factory built, confirmed as the privateer entry chassis 1075 at the 1969 24 Hours of Le Mans. In our assessment, it is one of perhaps 3 verified Le Mans entry Shelbys in existence. Its current condition is irrelevant to that status." The room was quiet. Diana Hale's associate leaned toward her and said something. She did not respond to him. She was looking at the car. After a moment, she walked forward, past the specialists, past Gerald Fitch, and she stood in front of the Shelby, the way a person stands in front of something they have misjudged badly and know it. Her voice, when she spoke, had lost the smooth executive register it always carried. It was quieter, more careful. The kind of voice that is feeling for solid ground. "Mr. Hale's report," she said, "the one the mechanic filed. I want you to know that I reviewed it personally after our last conversation, and it should not have been withheld from you at the point of sale." That was not correct. She paused. "I also want you to know that the offer we've made stands, and I understand if you need time." Marcus was standing near the rear of the car. He had not moved during Gerald Fitch's presentation. He did not move now. He looked at Diana Hale for a moment, and his expression was not triumphant, and it was not cold. It was the expression of a man who has finished a long piece of work and is simply present in the room where it ended. "I appreciate that," he said. He did not say anything else. 2 weeks later, Marcus declined the settlement offer in a single written sentence. The car was donated to the Shelby American Collection in Scottsdale to be displayed as a documented racing artifact. The plaque beside it would read, "In memory of Claire Reyes, who understood that things have histories whether or not anyone looks for them." Gerald Fitch told Marcus afterward that the donation was unusual. Most people in his position would have sold it. Marcus said he understood that. He said Claire had always believed that the best things should be where people could see them. He drove home that evening as the light was going flat and amber over the desert. The drive home took 40 minutes, and Marcus spent most of it in the particular quiet that follows the end of a long effort. Not silence exactly, but the absence of the low-grade tension that had lived in his shoulders for months. The desert light was doing what it does in the last hour before dark, turning everything it touched the color of old copper, and he drove through it without the radio on. Lily was asleep when he got home. Her aunt had put her to bed an hour earlier, and Marcus stood in the doorway of her room for a moment, looking at the small shape of her under the blanket. The stuffed rabbit Claire had given her tucked under one arm. He did not go in. He did not want to wake her. He stood there long enough to hear her breathe, and then he walked back down the hall. He went to the garage. He did not have a reason to. The car was in Scottsdale now, in a clean-lit room where people would look at it properly. But the garage was still his, still smelling of metal and oil and the particular dust of careful work, and he stood in it for a moment with the light on, the single overhead bulb that he always left burning when he was inside. He thought about the chassis stamp on the hidden rail. He thought about the way the timing gear cover had felt under his fingers the first time he pressed a cloth to it, and the number came clear. He thought about the blueprint folded into its linen sleeve, waiting in the dark, under the rear seat for however many decades it had waited, patient and specific, and entirely indifferent to whether anyone ever found it. The work had not been luck. That was the thing he wanted Lily to understand someday, when she was old enough for it to mean something. The car had not revealed itself. He had looked for it, methodically, in the order that the evidence suggested, the way Claire had taught him to look at things, not with excitement, but with attention. Disciplined looking, she used to call it. The kind of looking that does not stop when the first answer appears, because the first answer is rarely the whole answer. He turned off the garage light and went inside. The house was warm and quiet. He left one lamp on in the kitchen, the small one on the counter, and he sat down at the table where Lily's drawing from that morning was still spread out. A crayon picture of a car, orange and approximate and entirely confident. He looked at it for a while. Then he got up, folded it carefully, and set it on the shelf where he kept the things that mattered. The light in the kitchen stayed on.